بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا ما ينفعنا وزدنا علما وعملا يا رب العالمين. Welcome to session 12 of our book reading course on the historic judgment on interest by the Islamic Institute of Scholarship, also called the IIOS. Inshallah, this week we'll be starting from paragraph 166 over here. So paragraph 166, in the context of a modern capitalist system, it is the banks which advance depositors' money to the industrialists and traders. Almost all the giant business ventures are mostly financed by the banks and financial institutions. In numerous cases, the funds deployed by the big entrepreneurs from their own pocket are much less than the funds borrowed by them from the common people through banks and financial institutions. If the entrepreneurs have only 10 million of their own, acquire 90 million from the banks, and embark on a huge profitable enterprise, it means that 90% of the projects is created. 90% of those projects are created by the money of the depositors, while only 10% was generated by their own capital. If these huge projects bring enormous profits, only a small portion of interest, which normally ranges 2 to 10% in different countries, will go to the depositors whose input in the projects was 90%, while all the rest will be secured by the big entrepreneurs whose real contribution to the project was not more than 10%. So these big entrepreneurs, to explain that, they're basically getting more than they put in. They invested maybe, and I'm not saying that in the sense of investing generally. Rather, is that because of this factor of interest, they're now getting more than they deserve. That's a better way to put it. That they're getting more than they deserve. There's nothing wrong. Maybe let's say you, for example, in a Mudaraba contract, you set up a Mudaraba contract. You give a person who's about to start up a business, hey, I'll give you £5, and then glory be to Allah, somehow the person you gave the £5 to, he manages to make a profit of 50,000. And let's say you both agreed that, okay, I'll give you this £5, then how about you give me half of all the profits that you get? And he agrees and says, okay, fine, I'll give you half the profits of all I get. He comes back to you and says, oh wow, despite you giving me only £5 of an investment to help me out, I've actually made £50,000 in this short period or this long period, however long. And then you come to now divide that amount. You'll get 25,000, he gets 25,000. So this is a mudaraba contract. That's fine. That's not what we're talking about. That's a different type of investment. And of course, that's an Islamic finance investment. That's a permissible investment and form of contract. Here, this is completely different. And in this situation, these business ventures, as it says, it's mostly financed by the banks and financial institutions, right? And then the entrepreneurs from their own pocket, the funds that they deploy is far below. It's far below than those that are, than the amount, is far below relative to the funds borrowed by them. Okay, let that sink in. And then Mufti Taqi Usmani, after that he gives an example. He gives some figures, um, but then he's saying that these entrepreneurs, they're getting more than their real contribution towards the project was. So if they give 10% of a contribution, then somehow they're getting far more than that. Even this small proportion given to the depositors is taken back by these brig entrepreneurs because all the interest paid by them is included in the cost of their production and comes back to them through the increased prices. So the depositors, they suffer. They suffer in this system. Um, they will pay the interest. They pay, and the interest actually will include the cost of production as well. That was taken out. That gathered in the background. So they'll have to pay the interest, in which is the cost of production is included, and what comes back to them, it comes back to them through increased prices. The net result in this case is that all the profits of the big enterprises is earned by the persons who own financial input. The net result in this case is that all the profits of the big enterprises is earned by the persons whose own financial input did not exceed 10% of the total investment, while the people whose financial contribution was as high as 90% get nothing in real terms, because the amount of interest given to them is often repaid by them through the increased prices of the products, and therefore, in a number of cases, the return received by them becomes negative in real terms. Okay. So the depositors, they're suffering. So only a small portion, or maybe even only a small proportion, um, will go to the depositors. And to be honest, speaking it from a Islamic finance view, in reality, in reality, the depositors, what they're receiving isn't permitted really of the interest, but the main focus is that there's a large gap between what's earned between the two parties. So paragraph 167, while this phenomenon is coupled with the fact already mentioned that 64.5% of total advances went only to 0.4243% of total account holders, it means that the profits generated mostly by the money of millions of people went almost exclusively to 9,269 borrowers. One can imagine how far the interest-based borrowings have contributed to the horrible inequalities found in our system of distribution, and how great is the injustice brought by the modern commercial interest to the whole of society, as compared to the interest charged on the old consumption loans that affected only some individuals. How the present interest-based system works to favor the rich and kill the poor is succinctly explained by James Robertson in the following words. The pervasive role of interest in their economic system results in the systematic transfer of money from those who have less to those who have more. The pervasive role of interest in the economic system results in the systematic transfer of money from those who have less to those who have more. The pervasive role of interest in the economic system results in the systematic transfer of money from those who have less to those who have more. It's important. Actually repeating 3 times is something that helps to sink in the statement so you understand. It's actually it was a practice of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Again, this transfer of resources from poor to rich has been made shockingly clear by the Third World debt crisis, but it applies universally. It is partly because those who have more money to lend get more interest than those who have less. It is partly because those who have less often have to borrow more. And it is partly because the cost of interest repayments now forms a substantial element in the cost of all goods and services, and the necessary goods and services looms much larger in the finances of the rich. When we look at the money system that way, and when we begin to think about how it should be redesigned to carry out its functions fairly and efficiently as part of an enabling and conserving economy, the argument for an interest-free, inflation-free money system for the 21st century seems to be very strong. The same author, James Robertson, in another book, a separate book, he comments as follows. The transfer of revenue from poor people to rich people, from poor places to rich places, and from poor countries to rich countries by the money and finance system is systematic. He later says, one cause of the transfer of wealth from poor to rich is the way interest payments and receipts work through the economy. Now on to the expansion of artificial money and inflation. So paragraph 170, since interest-bearing loans have no specific relation with actual production, and the financier after securing a strong collateral, normally has no concern how the funds are used by the borrower. The money supply affected through banks and financial institutions has no nexus with the goods and services actually produced on the ground. It creates a serious mismatch between the supply of money and the production of goods and services. This is obviously one of the basic factors that create or fuel inflation. This phenomenon is aggravated to a horrible extent by the well-known characteristic of the modern banks, normally termed as, quote, money creation. Quote unquote, it's called money creation. Even the introductory books of economics usually explain, often with complacence, how the banks create money. This apparently miraculous function of the banks is sometimes taken to be one of the factors that boost production and bring prosperity. But the illusion underlying this concept is seldom unveiled by the champions of modern banking. So it's all put in a lot of flowers and rainbows that, it's positive, but in actuality, it does have a negative effect, if not more than one. The history of money creation refers back to the famous story of the goldsmiths of medieval England. So this the history of money creation refers back to the famous story of the goldsmiths of medieval England. The people used to deposit their gold coins with them in trust, and they used to issue a receipt to the depositors. In order to simplify the process, the goldsmiths started issuing bearer notes, which gradually took the place of gold coins, and the people started using them in settlement of their liabilities. When these receipts gained wide acceptability in the market, only a small fraction of the depositors or only a small fraction of the depositors or bearers ever came to the goldsmiths to demand actual gold. At this point, the goldsmiths began lending out some of the deposited gold secretly and thus started earning interest on these loans. After some time, they discovered that they could print more money, i.e. paper gold deposit certificates, than actually deposited with them, and that they could loan out this extra money on interest. They acted accordingly, and this was the birth of money creation, or it's also called fractional reserve lending, which means to loan out more money than one has as a reserve for deposits. In this way, these goldsmiths, after becoming more confident, started decreasing the reserve requirement and increasing the percentage of their self-created credit, and used to loan out 4, 5, even 10 times more gold certificates than they had in their safe rooms. Initially, it was an abuse of trust and a sheer fraud on the part of the goldsmiths, not warranted by any norm of equity, justice, and honesty. It was a form of forgery and usurpation of the power of the sovereign authority to issue money. But over time, this fraudulent practice turned into the fashionable standard practice of the modern banks under the fractional reserve system. How the money changes and bankers have succeeded in legalizing the creation of money by the private banks, in spite of the strong opposition from several rulers in England and the United States, and how the Rothschilds acquired financial mastery over the whole of Europe and the Rockefellers over the whole of America is a long story. Now lost in the midst of numerous theories developed to support the concept of money creation by the private banks. But the net result is that the modern banks are creating money out of nothing. I know maybe to some economists that sounds annoying, like quantitative easing, or you might hear maybe people say, oh, it's just creating money out of nothing. In actuality, you are printing more money. Studied quantitative easing, and you're just printing more money, and with that you bring a larger supply, and then everything else follows after that. And QE doesn't have it, although it did solve it had the effect of supposedly solving the GFC in 2008, although there's an allegedly, so I haven't got any proof of this, I just came across it. Apparently the drug economy saved the economy in the 2008, that period, GFC, the global financial crisis. Apparently the drug economy did that. So if you want to put QE and that together, I mean, they're maybe about the same status. So it's money created out of nothing. They are allowed to advance loans in the amounts 10 times more than their deposits. The coins and notes issued by circulation by the government as a genuine and debt-free money have now a very insignificant proportion to the total money in circulation, most of which is artificial money, created by advances made by the banks. The proportion of real money issued by the governments has been constantly declining in most of the countries, while the proportion of artificial money created by the banks out of nothing is ever increasing. The spiral of loans built upon loans is now the major part of the money supply. Taking the example of the UK, according to the statistics of 1997, the total money stock in the country was £680 billion, out of which 25 billion were issued by the government in the form of physical, tangible coins and notes. All the rest, i.e. £655 billion, were created by the banks. Artificial. They were all that was £655 billion of artificial money. It means that the original debt-free money remained only 3.6% of the whole money supply, while 96.4% is nothing but a bubble created by the banks. The way this bubble is growing annually can be seen from the following table that details the quantum supply of money in the UK during over 20 years. You can have a look at that over there. 174, paragraph 174. This table shows that the money created by the banks had been growing at a galloping speed throughout the 2 decades until it reached 680 billion pounds in 1997. Remember, just because the value on the table here goes up and up from 65 to 680, in actuality, it doesn't mean the value of the economy goes up. In actuality, if we really think about it, the value of the economy hasn't gone up because the bank decided to print some more money. It doesn't really work that way. People might say different things, but if I have a product that's worth £5, okay, and then you've got the bank printing more money, this product isn't going to be worth more unless maybe I think, oh, there's a lot of people here with all this money now, I'll just raise the prices. It doesn't actuality, that product is still worth, in reality, £5, but the inflation in real time the value is just, it's really in actuality the same. For what that value is worth, is £5. It doesn't mean in actuality that if it goes to like £8, £9, etc., that it's worth that much. It's only how much is being demanded. So this phenomenon unveils two realities. Firstly, it shows that 96.4% of the total money supply was, not is, because of course this was back then, so was debt-ridden money, and only 3.6% was debt-free. One can imagine how the whole economy of the UK drowned under the debt. Secondly, it means that 96.4% of the aggregate money circulated in the country is nothing but numbers created by computers having no real thing behind them. This is why, well, just to mention that in Islam, the concept of having a physical asset backing is very important. The situation in the USA is almost the same as the UK. Well, this was back then, so it was. Maybe it's more the same now. Don't know. Patrick Carmack and Bill Still observe about it as follows: why are we over our head in debt? Because we are laboring under a debt money system in which all our money is created in parallel with an equivalent quantity of debt that is designed and controlled by private bankers for their benefit. They create and loan money and interest. We get the debt. And later on he says, so although the banks do not create currency, they do create checkbook money or deposits by making new loans. They even invest some of this created money. In fact, over $1 trillion of this privately created money has been used to purchase US bonds on the open market, which provides the banks with roughly $50 billion in interest, less the interest they pay some depositors. It's interesting, it says some depositors, so does that mean that the banks do pay some depositors over $50 billion in interest? Either way, that's not a bank account to look into because it's got interest. In this way, through fractional or reserve lending, banks create far in excess of 90% of the money and therefore cause over 90% of our inflation. Although the conventional quantity theory of money has suggested many devices to control the money supply, including the control of interest rates by the government, these remedies are not the cure of the disease. They are temporary measures, and they themselves have their own side effects that subject the economy with shocks of the business cycle. Michael Rowbotham has rightly observed this, referring to the monetary management a government does by lowering or raising interest rates. This alternatively encourages or discourages borrowing, thereby speeding up or slowing down the creation of money and the growth of the economy. He later says the fact by this method, people and businesses with outstanding debts can be suddenly hit with huge extra charges on their debts simply as a management device to deter other borrowers is an injustice quite lost in the almost religious conviction surrounding this ideology. This method of controlling banks, inflation, and money supply certainly works. It works in the way that a sledgehammer works at carving up a roast chicken. An economy dependent upon borrowing to supply money, strapped to a financial system in which both debt that it's these are strapped to a financial system in which both the debt and the money supply are logically bound to escalate as punished for the borrowing it has been forced to undertake. Many past borrowers are rendered bankrupt, homes are repossessed, businesses are ruined, and millions are thrown out of work as the economy sinks into recession. Until inflation and overheating are no longer deemed to be a danger, borrowing is discouraged and the economy becomes a stagnating sea of human misery. Of course, no sooner has this been done than the problem is a lack of demand. It is lack of demand. So we must reduce interest rates and wait for the consumer confidence and the positive investment climate to return. The business cycle and the business cycle starts all over again. It begins all over again. There could be no greater admission of the utter and total inadequacy of modern economics to understand and regulate the financial system than through this wholesale entrapment and subsequent bludgeoning of the entire economy. It is a policy that which courts illegality as well as breaching morality in the cavalier way in which the financial contract of debt is effectively rewritten at will via the power of levying infinitely variable interest charges. Moreover, the baseless money created by the banks and financial institutions itself has now become the subject of speculative trade through the derivatives in the form of futures and options in the international markets. What it means is that in the beginning, claims over money have been treated as money. So the claims themselves on the money, over the money, they themselves have been treated as money. Now, claims over claims are being treated as such. So you have the money at the bottom, and imagine a claim on that money, a claim over that money. Okay. Now, that claim, is being treated as money as well. Then, let's say you put another thing on top of that, which is another claim, but instead of this being another claim on the money, it's a claim over that first claim. That claim is being treated as money as well, and it keeps on going. You'll have so many claims, one on top of the other, which are treated as money. According to an estimate, over 150 trillion US dollars worth of derivatives are circulating in the world. Whereas the combined GDP of all the 188 countries of the world, of course there's more countries now, is around $30 trillion US dollars only. So you have all these all the countries of the world back then, it was $30 trillion only. That was the combined GDP. Not to say that GDP is really a suitable indicator. One can easily disagree, but it's just what's common, so let's work by it. So GDP, back then, all these 188 countries, if you got their GDP together, it was about $30 trillion only. Somehow, $150 trillion, so that's $120 trillion more worth of derivatives are circulating in the same world. So almost 80% of this trade is in the hands of some 2 dozen big banks So that's 20, 2 dozen is 24. Or about, it says some, effectively it's saying some 24, so about, so it's in the hands of some 2 dozen big banks and hedge funds. The whole economy of the world has thus been turned into a big balloon that is being inflated on a daily basis by new debts and new financial transactions, having no nexus whatsoever with the real economy. This big balloon is vulnerable to the market shocks and can be burst at any time. It really did several times in the recent past, whereby the Asian tigers reached the brink of total collapse, and the effects of these shocks were felt in the whole world, to the extent that the media started crying that the market economy is breathing its last. Once again, we would like to quote James Robertson, who, in his excellent work, quote, which is called Transforming Economic Life, a Millennial Change, he has commented on this aspect as follows. The money must grow imperative is ideologically destructive. It also results in a massive worldwide diversion of effort away from providing useful goods and services into making money out of money. At least 954 of the billions of dollars transferred daily around the world are of purely financial transactions unlinked to transactions in the real economy. People are increasingly experiencing the workings of the money, banking, and finance system as unreal, incomprehensible, unaccountable, irresponsible, exploitive, and out of control. Why should they lose their houses and their jobs as a result of financial decisions taken in distant parts of the world? Why should the national and international money and finance system involve the systematic transfer of wealth from poor people to rich people, from poor countries to rich countries? Why should somebody in Singapore be able to gamble on a Tokyo Stock Exchange, which is about to bring that would effectively? So why can somebody in Singapore gamble on Tokyo's stock exchange, so in Japan, and then bring about the collapse of a bank in London? Why do young people trading in derivatives in the City of London get annual bonuses larger than the whole annual budgets of a primary school? Do we have to have a money and financial system that works like this? Even the financier, George Soros, I think I said that right, has said capital crimes. So this is probably where it's mentioned. So it looks like it's mentioned in the capital crimes of the Atlantic Monthly in January 1997 that, quote, the untrammeled intensification of the laissez-faire capitalism and the extension of market values into all areas of life is endangering our open and democratic society. The main enemy of the open society, I believe, is no longer the communist, but the capitalist threat. Apologies, just allow me to bring that back up again. There we go. Okay, so I believe is no longer the communist, but the capitalist threat. Paragraph 179. All this appalling situation faced by the whole world today is the logical outcome of giving of giving the interest-based financial system an unbridled power to reign the economy, can one still insist that the commercial interest is an innocent transaction? In the fact, the universal horrors brought about by the commercial interest, brought about by commercial interest, are far greater than the individual usurious loans that used to affect only some individuals. So now he goes on to, so that was paragraph 179. And then he goes on to interest and indexation, which is a good topic. And then he goes into markup and interest. But we'll keep it there for today. Paragraph 179. Yeah, we'll do that. So I hope that brings about maybe some truth to the ideas that have been put in front of our eyes for perhaps a long time now. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون سلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين آخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين